You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
And a very good evening to all of you on what is not only the last Haunted Histories on Parasearch, it's the last brand new Parasearch show ever. Oh, that's quite hard to say actually. 3 years of my life I've been doing this. In fact, people like Kerry and Paul and Richard even longer, and it's very hard to actually say goodbye, farewell, all that kind of thing, but unfortunately that's what we're having to do. But on a good note, you'll probably have seen that Kerry and Paul have actually announced they're going to be going over to Paranormal UK Radio for their what do we say, their show. They're going to be taking the Paranormal Concept show over there, so you're still going to be able to listen to them. And I can announce that I too am going to be taking Haunted Histories to another network, and if you want to find out where, go and give my new Haunted Histories page on Facebook a follow. Go and join it, and you can keep up to date with everything I'm doing. That's if you want to, I guess. And you will find out when I announce it very, very soon, the network that I'm going to be going to. So I hope that's all right with everyone, and keep an eye on it, and you will see where we're going to be going. But I thought, well, this show had actually been booked in for some time. It wasn't, it wasn't specifically when I found out this was going to be the last show that I decided to do on this particular subject and to have these particular guests. But it just sort of happened that way. And tonight's show is all about a place that is reported to be, and if anyone hears me croaking and sneezing, I haven't got the coronavirus. I've just got a stinking cold that will not go, but it's just a stinking cold. Verging on man flu, I think. I do think it's verging on man flu. But we're going to be talking about what is meant to have been one of the most violent penitentiaries in the whole of, America. But so that we get an unbiased view, I decided, well, why would we talk to Americans about that? Why don't we talk to their neighbours, the Canadians? And more so, why don't I get a Canadian on who knows the prison system? Because he's been a prison officer, or corrections officer as they're called over there, for some years, since he was a child, basically. And let's face it, he's not backwards and coming forwards. It's our very good friend, the one, the only, Mr. Wes Coleman.
Hello.
Hello, of the, as our mutual friend Richard Estep would say, the Canadian Old Pervert Society.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks for bringing that up again. I really appreciate that. We are called the Correctional Officers Paranormal Society, or COPS for short.
You are indeed.
But just before we get started, I just want to mention that the next guest that's coming up, Dave Gibb, he has been a mentor for our team for quite some time. He's actually what kind of got us into all of this. I had the idea, and then I wanted to try to find somebody that would really give us a really good start and tell us all about the ins and outs of the paranormal. And he has been just amazing to us. And we think the same way about how we approach the paranormal. And we also have the same kind of sense of humor. We always have a great time on investigations together. So with no further ado, I'd like you to introduce.
Oh, gee, thanks. Gee, thanks, Wes. Yeah, I'd put this all great little sentence in mind, how to introduce Dave, and you've just railroaded through it. But never mind, I'll try and pull that back. You know how it is. Canadians are like buses. You wait for one and then two come at once. As Wes has said, my other guest is the very lovely and we've been chatting a little bit off air before we hit the the live button. He's a lovely gentleman who I might hopefully be meeting when I come over to Canada in May. It's the wonderful Mr. Dave Gibb of Canadian Hauntings and Paranormal Society.
Hello
Hi,
there.
Dave. Hi, Dave.
Well, glad to be chatting with everybody.
No, so am I. So it's one of the best things about doing these kind of podcasts is I'm not limited to people who I can talk to, and people like Wes and all of those introduce me to new people, and they say, this person, you want to get to know this person. So it's something I'm very grateful for. Thank you, Wes.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So Dave, Wes has just given you a absolutely glowing report just then.
Yes.
How much did you pay him?
Well, that's undisclosed through our privacy laws in Canada, so just keep that one. So, fair amount of money, which isn't worth a hell of a lot of your money.
So how did you guys start working together? How did you guys meet?
Well, Wes had contacted me through Facebook or email, some or other, and I met him in a coffee shop in his hometown, and we just sort of talked about kind of the processes that I go through and what to the ups and downs of running a team and the ups and downs of dealing with clients and kind of the pragmatic approach of paranormal investigation as opposed to, I guess, a more dramatic approach one might see on television.
Uh-huh.
I do get a chance to mentor a number of teams. I get a lot of them come to me, and probably 60% of those teams that want to learn, they've been watching Ghost Adventurers or Most Haunted, and they've decided that that's it. And I guess maybe is more of a sit down real conversation, which was really great because Wes has got a nice pragmatic mind, and they've got a very tight knit group. So there wouldn't be a lot of the problems and implications one gets with a larger team.
Yeah.
And of course, the strive for success. And, once you start getting your ideas to get on TV, then that's sort of over. And we had a great chat, and we've had a number of really great co-investigations we've done together, and found that we kind of have the same sense of humor.
Yeah.
Which works great, when you're investigating into 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning.
I agree there. Yeah.
I think that's one thing that a lot of people would sometimes, because we tend to keep some of that actually on the videos we make.
Yeah.
I want to portray that image that like when you go to investigate, you don't have to turn it into a university project. It's you have it as well. I mean, really, most times you're paying for it.
Yeah.
And or you're doing it for free. So why not enjoy it? So we had a great time together, and Wes has stood by our team thick and thin, and is one of the few teams I will refer cases to and trust in this province.
Cool. Well, I just want to say we've got quite a few people coming into the chat room already. So hi SJ, hi, it's Richard Clements, not another Richard Clements, who was actually one of the founders of Parasearch Radio, and who was actually the guy who discovered me. So anyone who wants to send sort of death threats to him for getting me on the airwaves, that's the guy. Also, Corinne Bassant's come in and sort of said she's popping in and out as she's working, which she always does, but she always ends up listening to me more than she does working. And soon-to-be former Evil Queen, Miss Kerry Green, always listening as well. So hi to everyone. Thank you for sharing it out for me, Richard. Hope you all enjoy tonight's show. I think what you were saying about the sense of humour, Dave. I mean, it's something I was actually chatting to someone about the other day, because they got criticised for having a laugh and a joke on an investigation by some guests. The guests said that they were being disrespectful to spirits, and I sort of said, yeah, but you're not being disrespectful to the spirits. You're actually having a laugh and a joke that they can almost join in on. How is that being disrespectful? It's not like you're pointing at the spirit and going, ha ha, you died of the plague. You were all smelly and pussy when you died. Ha ha ha. It's not like that. It's treating them as though, and I use this phrase an awful lot, and people are probably bored of hearing it, but they're sentient beings. If they are, they would have a sense of humour themselves. So seeing people laughing and joking and having fun would probably encourage them to kind of join in. And it's not being derogatory towards them. It's not taking the piss out of them, basically. It's actually giving them a chance to be normal.
if track records show, and they do, I mean, we've done a couple of investigations, and when the highest rate of us getting an EVP is honestly when we are just talking, taking the piss out of each other. You know, somebody passes gas, and then all of a sudden, you know, there's a good laugh, and then you get something. So it honestly is not when you're doing the prescribed questions, which you've got to do, but it is during that off time where, you know, they're not, you know, I guess they would be more inclined to sort of jump in on the conversation because it's normality, I guess.
Yeah.
You really have to keep it light.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that you call it the Monsters Inc. theory, and most people have heard of this over the last 3 years I've been talking, that a laughter produces more energy than fear. So if you're laughing and creating laughter and everything, it's potentially going to give more, it seems to give more energy to the whatever a spirit is to actually then interact. And I think it's just it's my go-to. And like I say, I would never tease a spirit. I would never crack jokes at their expense or whatever, like, or bully them in that respect to make other people laugh. It's not something, I agree, that's not fair, but you know, having a laugh while you're doing something and almost taking the mickey out of yourself to make other people laugh, can't see the problem in that myself.
Sometimes that's a little difficult in a prison situation, though, when you're investigating a prison, to be aim your laughter at them. They tend to get a little upset, as I'm sure Dave would agree.
In what way? Can you give us an example, Wes?
Well, they tend to, I mean, this is great as far as activity goes. I mean, they tend to be a little more guarded with some of the things that you present to them, like some of the, if I were to talk about prison humor during an investigation in a prison, it tends to really amp up the activity. It makes, I don't know, like, but I'm talking very derogatory, humor, humor that, I mean, if you watch the video, which I'm hoping that you'll post on the website there, you can see some of the ways we try to get reaction, and some of it can be very, very strong. And so you have to be really careful. People watching the video, you know, I'll just warn you right now, there are moments where we tend to provoke a little. Right. But in an atmosphere like that, it's more an acceptable measure than it would be, say, you know, in a private residence, which you wouldn't do that at all. Or
in an asylum or a hospital or a workhouse where people have gone real suffering. You wouldn't want to provoke.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, I haven't got around to watching the videos yet, because when they came through, it was the kids were home from school, and my life grinds to a halt if I want to actually do anything involving my phone or my computer when they're both home, because they commandeer them. But I will be watching them. I have saved them ready to watch. But I mean, this is to Wes, obviously, as the prison, say, expert. You've got a lot of experience of prisons. Would you be concerned taking a female investigator in, say, like myself, into somewhere, and we're going to be talking about West Virginia, Penn, but would you be concerned, or would you have any concerns, or what would those concerns be potentially if you were taking me in somewhere like that to do an investigation?
Well, not at all, actually. I mean, there is a sense of, the old school kind of man protect a woman thing, but really, the prisons these days, I mean, not so much back then, but these days it's almost 50-50 women and men working as correctional officers, right? Which is an awesome thing, because women in situations are a lot more better than men are. Yeah. And a lot of that is, the inmates have a code, and unless it's some kind of a severe sexual offender, generally speaking, women are protected. Yeah. I mean, there is the occasional case where they are attacked, but usually there's reasons behind that. Right. But I think women, in a situation like Sandy, who is Dave's wife, was at Moundsville with us, as well as there were other women there as well. And they went into one of the cells there. I think it was, we'll get into it later, but there was a guy named Red, and he was a very well-noted inmate.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Red Snyder in a bit. Yeah.
Well, but she went in and sat down in the cell and started, saying, like, I bet you've never had two women in your cell before. And just kind of went on that kind of a tangent.
Yeah.
And really, it really changes the atmosphere, and you can actually feel it.
It's interesting you say that, because I don't know I think I've told you before, Wes, but my mum used to be a Samaritan. The people you phone when you're suicidal or need to talk to someone and all that. And they do a service. I don't know if they do it in Canada or in America or whatever, but they provide a service in the UK where the Samaritans will train people in prisons to be listeners so that other prisoners can offload to them when they're feeling down and low, and then the listener then offloads to the Samaritan. And I know when my mum sort of said, yeah, I'm going into Norwich prison, which I think is a category A prison in the UK. I think I might be category B, I'm not sure, but I thought it was a category A. And she said, oh yeah, I'll go and sit in the cell with one of the listeners, and then they'll tell me some of the stuff they've had to deal with and ask me my advice and offload to me and all this. And I was like thinking, my little 70-odd-year-old mum is sitting in a cell with a killer or an armed robber or stuff like that. And I must admit, I was quite concerned. But she said exactly the same thing. She said they wouldn't lay a finger on me. They would protect me. If something happened, I can guarantee that prisoner would literally barricade the door so nobody could get to me to protect me because of the code. And it's quite interesting when you think of the men, I would say, that they're meant to be these big, awful, horrible people. But as you're saying, they still have a code.
Yeah, kind of like the prison guards, big, awful people, right?
You're big and scary and not like cuddly teddy bears at all, Wes. No. I'm not allowed, Dave, I get told off when I say that Wes isn't actually as big and scary as he comes across. He's actually a very sweet, cuddly teddy bear. He tells me off for saying that, so I'm not allowed to say it. So anyone who heard that, don't listen. I didn't really say he was a big teddy bear. So, yeah, West Virginia, the Penitentiary, or it's in Moundsville. It's officially known as West Virginia Penitentiary, but it's in Moundsville. It opened in the very late 1800s, about I think it was 1876, and it's in a very similar design to a prison that was built in Joliet, Illinois, in 1858. One of the things I've noticed about a lot of these big American penitentiaries is the whole sort of Gothic, imposing, almost castle-like, fort-like appearances of them. West Virginia looks like it. Obviously, I can never Joliet, however it's pronounced. Looks like. Thank you. Looks like it. Missouri State Pen looks like it. Bushy Mountain, or whatever it's called in Tennessee, looks like it. They've all got a very similar kind of foreboding, almost dark, sort of horror film castle-like facade. Do you believe? I mean, Dave, this is to you. Do you think that's deliberate? That they were all created to have that kind of imposing Gothic sort of... Because prisons in the UK don't look like that, in the main.
Well, I think so. I mean, it's... For me, I mean, when we arranged to investigate the place, coming up on it, it was intimidating to me, and I was just going in there, right? I mean, when you're in there, it's that or any of the other prisons that we've investigated, it's much the same. It's got that intimidation factor for sure. It's icy, it's cold, it's lots of cement, it's a lot of iron.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's got to belittle you to a point, right?
I think it's beautiful. I think these kind of buildings are beautiful. I think the design that's gone into them is so sort of almost medieval fairy tale-esque. I think they're lovely. But then again, I've never had to go into one and known that I was going to be slammed in a cell, a tiny cell, a 5x7 cell that had to hold 3 prisoners in. I think it was 1929. The cells were way overcrowded. So, Wes, when was it you first? Because I know you've recently visited it this weekend, just gone, haven't you? You went to to Moundsville because you were in area. When was it you first visited it with Dave and his gang?
Well, it was 2014 that we went with Dave, and he went before that.
Right.
And he at that point said that was the place to go. He said that is one of the best places, if not the best place he's ever done.
Okay.
And so, I mean, the expectations, of course, and Dave's bringing correctional officers with him, all four of us, Chris and Darren and Terry, all four of us went. And it was an incredible experience just to see. That was the first kind of time that we ever experienced old style prisons.
Okay.
With the exception of Kingston Penitentiary, which was went around started in 1865, which we still to this day have not been able to get into to do a paranormal investigation.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, on a side note, but it was a wonderful a place to go to really open your eyes with the paranormal, and we had lots of activity.
Okay, so Dave, you'd been there before you took Wes and the other old perverts in with you. What was your first impression? I'll call it Moundsville because it's easier to say than West Virginia Penitentiary all the time. What was your first impression of Moundsville when you went in there?
Well, it was definitely the biggest place we had ever investigated. I mean, it's a couple 100,000 square feet. It's dark. It's huge. It's ominous. It's it's an absolute intimidation. We had gone in there with another team from the States. It's always been a big mandate of ours to do a lot of cross investigation with other teams. I mean, to give you an idea, I think the first time we went in there, I think there was 24 of us.
Right.
And honestly, I think we broke down into teams of 3, 4, and you'd never bump into each other.
Yeah.
You wouldn't hear each other. It was impossible. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the equipment that we brought was useless because, I mean, if you bring, say, a DVR system, which we have, 1,000-foot cables for, you still can't run them because it's not going to cover anything.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, and it was I always say, like, of a number of 100 investigations we've conducted, probably number 1 and 2. So I mean, there's one other place in the States that we frequent that Wes has been to, as well as Moundsville. It's always the top. When I say to my team, where do you want to go back to, or what should we do? We've got an anniversary coming up. Let's go. It's Moundsville. The activity was ridiculous in there. There was like every floor there was something happening that was completely indiscernible. As Wes will tell you, I'm not shy on debunking stuff or not. It's not a show for me. So, but there was a lot of stuff happening that I can honestly say it was probably the first investigation I've ever done where I actually was really, really, really super uncomfortable to go somewhere.
Really?
I was pretty scared actually at some points. I mean, like where, there was times when my own team, we had to stop investigating, go out, have a smoke and calm our nerves down before we went back in. It was
wow.
It was quite shocking, which was great. I mean, that's kind of what I'm in this for. So
you can't say something like that, Dave, and then not give us some more information as to what maybe one of the incidents that caused you to have to literally regroup.
Well, sometimes actually it's almost the reaction of your own crew that freaks you out. That was the first thing that happened there was actually due to one of my crew's reaction. When I think a bat flew into her hair and she screamed directly in my face, and it went through me like somebody had possessed me, and I left to go out. But beyond that, I remember there's a psych ward there, and a documented story of a guy clawed out his eyes with a fork, really kind of gory, and it had 2 sets of stairs, concrete and steel stairs on either end of it. And I know we were in there, and we heard this, what must have sounded like Godzilla walking up those stairs. And I mean, getting closer, and then one of the swinging doors slammed open from one of the other ends.
Right.
And I'll tell you, when that happened, you're just thinking you're about to get eaten by a velociraptor, right? So, we did book it down the stairs on the other side, went out to the back, and just had a smoke and kind of cooled ourselves down, because it was, we're an investigator. It doesn't make you superhuman. Once in a while, you're going to freak out. And, I was up there with 3 other people, and 2 of them bolted like they were in the Olympic Games. So, inside your mind, you've got that, why the hell are they running? Because I haven't seen anything yet, but I've been hearing it. And
Yeah.
if it's bolting, then something's coming to eat me. And, so you run. And that's a dead set rule, right? You run, you get hurt, you hurt other people, you create mob mentality.
Mm-hmm.
But bam, we booked it out of there pretty quick. And that was one of the first experiences, because that was the area in the prison that I started investigating that night first.
The psych wing. The psych wing. Yeah. Okay.
So, but no, the place is endless for the amount of things that happened in there.
Okay. So, Wes, you went there sort of 5-6 years ago. Now you're used to prisons. You're used to the depravities that man can do. I don't mean that you personally. Well, I do mean that you personally, but you know what I mean. You're used to dealing with some pretty sort of depraved individuals. What did you think when you first walked through the doors?
I was pretty amazed by the whole place, the layout of the place. We had an amazing tour by a historian there that gave us an idea of what happened in each area and the deaths that took place. More of kind of a morbid tour, because he knew we were all paranormal investigators. However, that being said, I can remember a point where I thought, instead of, before I came, I thought, okay, when we're going to go in there, we're going to hype the activity. Like, the activity is going to go off the charts. They're going to be disrespectful to us. They're going to be all crazy all over us. And I'm referring to the spirits here, not Dave's group. But we got in there, and I almost felt like they were intimidated, the spirits here, because we did what they call a mock count. And what that is in an institution's daily life, there are 4 or 5 or even 6 counts a day where you count the inmates, and they all have to be in their cells.
Yeah.
And if you watch the video, you can see me addressing at the bottom of 5 tiers of inmates. You can see me addressing all the different tiers by yelling, "Count up!" Everybody come forward. Yelling very loudly, which is what a correctional officer would do. And when I stopped, it was just like the most unearthly silence you would ever hear. It was just I can't even explain it. A chill kind of went down the back of my neck. At the same point, you could kind of see shadows sticking their heads in and out of the cells.
Wow.
Now, whether that would be psychological, I don't know. But I know at the time the energy was high, but high in a way that they felt intimidated by the whole scenario.
Yeah. Well, I guess they hadn't. If we're talking 2014, they hadn't had a CO in there for nearly 20 years yelling instructions at them. So to suddenly go...
Yeah, they've had different COs from the community that used to work there go in there quite a bit, actually.
Oh, right.
And I'm not sure. They may be able to correct me on this, but I think maybe one of the people that were doing the tour was an ex-correctional officer. And he gave, it was an amazing tour. But so they do have regular stop-ins by former correctional officers.
So I didn't mean it like that. I meant one being a corrections officer, if that makes sense. So yelling the things out, rather than just talking to people and saying this is where such and such happened, and doing a brilliant tour. Going into CO mode, if that makes sense.
Right.
Does that make sense? So almost triggering.
Yeah, I don't know if any of them tried that, because there are people that are doing the tour that also do the paranormal stuff as well.
Ah, so maybe they do.
So it's really it kind of made me think differently, because I honestly thought when we would get in there, we would feel physical stuff, which we did feel some, but nothing to the point that I thought Like, for instance, Ohio State Reformatory, when I was there, like I had my ear flicked, I had something hit my leg. I mean, we had different activity in there, but Moundsville was it was very subdued, and it could have been just the night too. I mean, Dave will tell you that whenever we do investigations, I mean, any given night things can change, right? Depending on a lot of different factors.
Mm. Okay. Or maybe it's just you're so big and scary, whereas they suddenly thought, shit, this is a CO, we can't mess around.
No, I'm not so sure about that. But
So, looking a bit at the history of the place, and actually no, I'm a big fan of using triggers because, I'll say this, and I talk about triggers in my new book, A Haunted Experiment. I talk about them in there because I think the great thing about using triggers to sort of almost elicit activity, if you like, it's the only thing stopping you is your imagination. You know, if you can do a tiny bit of research into a place, you can probably pull out something that is more than likely going to trigger some kind of a response, whether that be sound, whether it be an item, whether it be a reenactment. Because I know when we did Bodmin Jail, didn't we, Wes, last year with Richard Estep and all that lot, and doing that almost like mocked up hanging seemed to trigger some major stuff afterwards. So, you know, it is purely your imagination, but it's. I mean, Dave, what do you think about triggers? What sort of triggers do you like using, or don't you like using?
Well, actually, you bring that up, the whole mock situation. My wife Sandy and I, we were in I think it would be considered the north wing of Moundsville, which is where the hard times were doing. And
it's where all the executions were as well, wasn't it, in the northern area? Mm.
Well, certainly where death row was, and we went into sort of a mock pro guard versus pro prisoner argument.
Okay.
And to kind of give you a visual above you, you're kind of in a cage. The whole area down there is caged, and the upper 3 decks are you can't get up to on that particular portion.
Right.
And we were having this argument, and within 5-6 minutes, we were getting pelted with pebbles. Both of us were getting hit in the head and had to move out of there.
Wow.
So yeah, no, absolutely. And no, in that place, you know, like we're not provokers. Wes's team, they're not provokers. But when you go in there, you're quite literally by the staff provoked to provoke. You realize that this place contains, you know, murderers and diddlers, and these are, well, if you're going to provoke, get your goings out and kind of provoke in a respectful manner, if that sounds ridiculous, but it is. But yeah, everywhere we went in there, you know, you're using that. Obviously, we couldn't bring a weapon or a shank in there, but anything you could, you could certainly bring forth. You know, it's going to be your best chance. It might not work at all.
Yeah.
But in there, it did. In there, you know, if you were in the insane asylum and you're crying and begging for help, you'd be shocked. You know, just the way things happen. But down there, you know, you're having an argument, and then of course, her being a woman, and she was using that as well, and it was there was absolutely a flurry of activity in that particular area, and the mood was very dark. It got very dark in there. You know, again, it was awesome.
Cool.
I thought it was, which is really funny that where Wes and I actually had a differing of things here, because Wes didn't have as much experience at West Virginia. He had more at Mansfield. Whereas it was completely reversed for me. At Mansfield, it was quite docile. But West Virginia was an absolute crazy house.
Interesting. Well, the other thing about Moundsville, I mean, there's a few little things that I found out as I was doing my research before we get on to some of the more gruesome things to do with Moundsville. But one of my the other shows on Parasearch, one called The Dark Mirror Show, a couple of weeks ago, did a show on the Greenbrier ghost case, where a ghost supposedly came back and told, the ghost of the murder victim came back and told her mum that her husband had killed her. And said husband actually was in Moundsville and died in Moundsville. Now, if you haven't listened to that show, head on over to Spreaker. Even though the station is going to be closing down, we are going to be keeping all the shows on Spreaker for another month, so until the end of March. But then, if you want to still listen to them, you can head on over to our Parasearch account on YouTube and listen to all those shows. But so there's a link there, the Greenbrier Ghost. The other fact I found that I thought was quite funny, actually, was the fact that Charles Manson lobbied to be moved to Moundsville, so he was nearer to family, and he was turned down. So maybe they thought he'd get too many of the prisoners on side. I don't know. I don't know the reasoning behind it. Apparently there's something to do with that in the museum at the prison about Manson wanting to be moved there. I don't know if you guys, either of you, know anything about that. And also it's on the site and opposite an ancient Adena Indian burial ground.
Yeah, the mound.
Yeah. Do you think, and I am doing deliberately, this is a yes/no answer, you don't have to give loads of information. Do you think that the fact it's an Indian burial ground opposite, Native American burial ground opposite, do you think that potentially can ramp up what goes on there?
No.
Okay. You don't think that has any relevance to it?
No.
Okay. Why?
Well, just in my own research, I mean, there's a couple ways of looking at this. One, I mean, when people investigate graveyards, this is where your body is, your carcass is, right? I mean, I don't know who would hang out with their carcass. Two, I've investigated a number of places that have the implications of not even indigenous, but anybody else who's been buried near it. Never been a factor. Mm-hmm. Three, we've done work with the nations, with First Nations peoples, and their first advice that they gave to me was, you got to stop thinking about native burial grounds, because really most times people just got buried wherever. There's not really, it's nothing so specific. I don't know. I just I think that's personally something that's sort of put to media, put to movie, put to
Hollywoodized.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
I mean, when I see teams out investigating graveyards, besides the outdoor mitigating factors that they're going to ruin their evidence, I think to myself, I'm not going to hang out with my rotting corpse.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I love graveyards. I find them incredibly relaxing, and I actually quite enjoy looking at the gravestones and like reading the people's names and all that kind of thing from a historical perspective. But no, I've investigated the odd church, but never like an unused church, a disused church, but never a graveyard itself. So it's interesting that you say that. Thank you. Right, let's talk about some of the gruesome shit, because that's what people want to hear about. There was 94 executions at Moundsville. 85 of those were hangings. And one of the hangings was in June, I think it was 19th of June, 1931. And the hanging of this chap is why they stopped making hangings public, because he was actually decapitated as the trap doors went. For some reason they'd messed it up, and they actually decapitated him as he was hanged. Sorry, a guy by the name of Frank Heyer. The last actual hanging at Moundsville was of a chap called Bud Peterson, who murdered a young woman by the name of Bessie Wright in June of 1947, and his body is actually buried in the prison graveyard because his family didn't want it. They wanted nothing to do with him, which apparently was quite common. Now, I found a list of all the executions, and the remaining executions, the remaining 9 were all done via electrocution, so old Sparky. Now, I found a list of all the executions, and I started going through them. Does the area of Moundsville or West Virginia have a high, I can't think of a technical way of putting it, black population?
Oh, I would say no.
Yeah, you look at the list of executions, and I didn't quite work out the percentages, but I would have said probably a good 70-80% their race was down as black, which I found quite a sort of. I know it's one of the things we read over here in the UK of when people talk about death row and the sort of the mix of people on it. It is predominantly what we'd call ethnic minorities that are in it. I'm not passing judgment, but that kind of rang true by looking at the list of executions. Now, I believe Old Sparky is still there. The chair is still there, and there's the execution cap as well, I think, in the museum. Is that right, Wes? I think you sent me a photo of it, yeah.
Yes, Steve Hummel actually has it in his museum in Moundsville. He's opened up a museum with a lot of different haunted artifacts, so-called haunted artifacts inside.
Okay. Did you, when you were there recently, did you pick up anything from the chair or the cap, or... Because I'm always interested to know if they carry some kind of...
Residual?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, basically, I find, and this has just been in my experience, that whenever you remove something from its location, it tends to either do one of two things. It either, refuses to want to be in that situation, or else the energy just dies in it. And when I was there, I excuse the pun, dies. But when I was there, I just didn't feel anything at all with the cap. I went right up to it and examined it and tried my best to kind of get a feeling, but I really didn't feel anything at all compared to when we actually went to the chair in Moundsville, and the feeling there of the actual chair was completely different than the cap.
Okay.
I mean, everything can be different, right?
Yeah.
And any person can have different experience, but that's just the way my experience was.
Yeah. So I'll direct this at Wes first, because we've actually got someone else who wants to join this call who accompanied you there on Monday. Is it all right if I add him into the call?
Absolutely.
It's Richard Estep. He's sort of, I'm just calling him now because he wants adding in. If he's going to answer the phone, let's hope it's ringing, or I can see it ringing, and I think he's there. Hello, Richard.
Hey, Penny.
And you've got Wes here, and you've got Dave from Chaps. So play nice, boys.
Oh,
Chaps, how are you?
I'm well.
Now, hi, Richard. Anyone who doesn't recognise his voice obviously hasn't listened to my show enough. It's my good friend, the writer, the investigator, and the all-round piss-taker, Mr. Richard Estep. He messaged me when he knew this was going to be the last show and said, "Oh, can I come along and say something?" And we thought, well, it's actually quite fitting because he actually visited Moundsville with Wes on Monday, wasn't it? Was it Monday this week you went to visit there?
Saturday.
Oh, it was Saturday, was it? Okay, sorry. So he's actually visited there as well. But what we were just talking about, Richard, was the fact that we were talking about the actual chair, Old Sparky, whether you could pick up anything from it. Now, Wes had said he kind of did. What about you, Dave? Is it scary, the chair? Do you feel quite anything from it?
Not particularly. I mean, if we're talking about sort of a psychometric response, no. I mean, I'm not even necessarily sure that particular chair was there. I'm trying to remember if that was actually their chair or just a chair.
It says on the website it is. It says on the website it's the original.
Okay. I don't know. I didn't particularly get much from it. I mean, much as like in other jails, standing in the gallows or whatever, and even at Moundsville being in the gallows wasn't particularly thrilling. I'm not sure necessarily if it's because maybe spirit doesn't want to be anywhere near it, or we've got an absolutely preconceived notion that being near something like that will give you that automatic sensation. So in which case your senses are already heightened to want to accept something. Yeah. You're creating a pareidolia of your own.
Yeah.
But no, I mean that's certainly not where I had much. I guess it's almost the same. Though Wes and I had differing experiences.
Yep.
down in the Sugar Shack down there, which is really where I think
we're going to go on to the Sugar Shack next. That is very hard to say, actually, fast, the Sugar Shack.
I mean, it was the scene of a lot of nastiness down there, but it was also their hangout. And I myself didn't get much down there, and I'm thinking largely because of the fact that it was, and I'll bring up another spot in the whole, because Wes and I did a whole bunch of debunking down there. The Sugar Shack kind of left, you watched 30 television shows on this before you investigate it just to see what it looks like. And I expected to go down there and feel my trousers get thrown to my ankles and thrown into a corner, whatnot. I mean, it was going to be horrible, but really it didn't do anything for me. We did get some EVP work happening down there. We got some EVPs. And we did hear a screaming from outside of there.
Right.
But down in the Sugar Shack itself, other than looking ominous, it didn't do, that part of the prison didn't do that much for me. I know Wes had a little more.
Wes?
Yeah, well, we had the group that we were in. We heard whistling, and we kind of set that up because I was in a chair, and one of the codes of a prison is that you never whistle, and whistling can get you killed.
Why?
And
why can it get you killed?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, why can it get you killed? Sorry, Wes.
Because you're portraying to other inmates that you're happy to be there. And, the overwhelming response to all inmates is that when you're in prison, you're there and you're upset, you're not with your family, the obvious reasons. And if you display that, oh, I'm happy, and that kind of an image, it's taken as a great insult by other inmates. And they will, I would never go in to work and start whistling in front of inmates. That's just the worst thing, one of the worst things you could do.
So can they not sing along to their radios and things like that either?
No, well, you would never hear that. I mean, you'd hear the radios, but you would never hear them singing, that's for sure. It's just not a place that joy would be something that you would feel or hear in there. So anyway, so what I did is I whistled, and I actually got a whistle back. And a lot of things in Moundsville, a lot of the activity we got, it didn't seem to happen like right in the area. It seemed to be a distance away. So we would get like screaming, as Dave said, and you would hear that in the distance. We would hear footsteps, which actually were a little closer than in the distance. But nevertheless, you still, any kind of even the EVPs, they were there, but they weren't like right in front of the recorder. So it's quite a different dynamic, really.
It's interesting you say the whistling. They're not allowed to whistle because that then makes out that they're in a good mood, and you're not meant to be in a good mood if you're in prison. Come back to the conversation we were having right at the beginning, that the common thing of laughing and joking doesn't seem to elicit that much of a response in a prison. Do you think that's all linked? That laughing and joking, you're not meant to laugh and joke in a prison, therefore that's why the laughing and joking, that if you're investigating an old school, if you're even investigating a hospital, you can actually create energy that way. Why perhaps that doesn't work in the same way in a prison?
Very possible. The one thing about a prison is even among guards as well, you're there and you're not really happy that you're there. You're there to do a specific job. And the humor amongst guards is just off the charts. I think that's why I get along so well with Dave and Richard, because they kind of understand the sense of humor that's involved, because it's certainly it's an outlet for us. It's something that we use as a stress reliever. But at the same time, it's something that's not done in front of inmates, or if it is, it's really frowned upon.
Right.
And it's often very, very dark. So the humor is very, very dark. So when you do it in an investigation style setting, like in a prison where, all these inmates have been either killed or, have had a really rough time, you have to be really, really careful. You have to be careful with the humor that you display. Yeah.
So what was your initial thoughts of, I'm calling it Moundsville rather than its full title, Richard. What was your initial thoughts of it when you visited it the other day?
Well, I think it looked very grim and imposing, just as a prison should.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very large, very bleak. So that style of architecture you see in a lot of American prisons.
What did I say at the beginning, boys? That's exactly what I said at the beginning.
Exactly. But, that being said, there's a lot of British prisons that look the same, and Bodmin is another. I mean, it's not Gothic, but I think is it Victorian? And
no, it's Georgian, isn't it?
Okay. So, I mean, it's still very intimidating. I mean, you go to Bodmin, and that overlooks the entire town, and the first thing you see when you come into that town is the prison, and it's very intimidating.
Well, I think a prison should look intimidating, shouldn't it? That's a large part of its reason for being. It serves, or theoretically, as a deterrent that you don't want to end up in there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the design with a lot of buildings, even the workhouses, when they started designing the work in the UK anyway, when they started designing those in the 1830s, they didn't want them to look like a nice place to be. They wanted them to look very regimented, very sort of almost factory-like, very sort of not somewhere that you think you're going to have a mega comfortable existence. So it's a bit like we were saying about perception, about being by the electric chair. You might have a certain perception that something's going to happen. It's a similar thing, isn't it? The mind is a powerful thing. Yeah. But it was more the sort of the gothicness of a lot of these American prisons that I was kind of referring to, rather than just like the stone and looking imposing. There does seem to be almost like a gothic fort, castle type appearance to so many of them. Had you been to Moundsville before, Rich?
I hadn't been to Moundsville before, and I only really took it as a day trip because Wes had recommended it. And it was a good way to get a breath of fresh air, ironically, from the case that we were working on. So I'd certainly recommend going to give it a look, though.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. From what the boys have been saying to me, it's on my list now to check out if I ever get over there. But we were talking about some of the sort of. I mean, it's 5 to 10 now, and although apparently because this is the last show, I've been told you can talk for longer if you want. You don't have to stick to the hour if it's going well. So I'm going to monopolise the airwaves now. One of the most infamous cases that happened there, and I think I can't remember whether it was Wes or Dave alluded to it at the beginning, was the murder of William Red Snyder in not that long ago actually, and he apparently was he was one of 12 children. His mum had died quite young, and he was a bit of a troublemaker, in and out of what would the term be, not facilities, but institutions and various things, pretty much his whole life. I say the fact he was one of 12, I would wager he came from quite a poor background as well. And apparently his favourite programme was Days of Our Lives. And one of the things I was reading, that people who go to investigate there, if they start talking about the current episodes of Days of Our Lives, they can get quite a lot of a reaction from him by talking about them. So maybe next time. But he was in cell number 20, I believe. And he was stabbed to death multiple times by someone called Russell Rusty Lassiter, who was supposed to be, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, guys, was supposed to actually be his friend. But he was killed on the order of one Elijah Sutton, who was the head of sort of the, white supremacy group in that prison. Now, Dave, I think it was you were saying that your wife had gone into that cell, into Red Cell.
Yeah.
And what?
Yeah, she went in there actually with my niece, who was also on the team, and they squatted along with having several women there or whatnot. I don't really recall them getting much of a reaction by that. I don't. Now, mind you, Sandy, she's got a lot more bollocks than me, to be honest with you. She really does, and she probably is twice as logical. So she literally be waiting to get punched in the face.
Right.
So it might have been that degree where you take somebody who's maybe almost. I have a really hard time with us using the term scientific means, but she's probably as close to scientific on our team as can be. So if she can't really feel it, then she's not looking out for it either. But we didn't get that. Like I said, it's weird that the places that were in that prison that were cited to be the places of activity where you get it the most weren't. Take one of the places, which was the cafeteria. We had a running water fountain, which had no plumbing to it and had no power to it.
Right.
It was squirting water. So things like that were kind of weird. I was like, how are you going to get it here in the cafeteria? But, the places where we're supposed to get it, we didn't like that. No. It's definitely where his cell is. And I guess sometimes legend is brought out by the surrounding. I mean, where his cell is kind of in the darker part of the edge. And it's it looks like it should be the cell that would kill you. But no, great gory story. But we didn't get reactions like that. Wes and I did. Like Wes and I were working down that area, and we got what sounded like something running back and forth up in the upper tiers on the steel, which was kind of neat. Could it have been an animal? I guess.
Possibly.
But it was following a path back and forth. So. But that's the only activity I've felt in that side of things.
Okay.
Maybe I think possibly I try to be kind of pragmatic to a fault.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm also going in there with kind of a debunk it.
Yeah.
I'm going in there as a researcher.
Yeah.
Which I know Wes does too. And honestly, in essence, that's almost your worst enemy, right? Because you're going in there to enjoy something and get freaked out, but when you're too busy tearing theories to shreds.
Yeah.
You should have seen Wes and I in what they call the hole, where they would take, the prisoners and hammer them up to walls and whatever. And honestly, we were busy going over the plumbing down there, and they're saying, well, there would have been a boiler in place here. This wouldn't have been a cell, and yada 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 yada. It was actually kind of funny because that's supposed to be the scariest place, one of the scariest places there, when really somebody passing gas was the scariest thing that occurred down there.
The thing is, I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, it depends what you go. If you're going on like a public event and you're the one debunking every single thing that's happening, it kind of spoils it for those people. It's a once in a blue moon thing they're going to be doing. But if you're going in there to do research, I know Richard and I, we both write. We're both writers, although Richard's obviously written quite a bit more than me, but we're both writers. You're wanting to go in there to possibly get something, but I mean, I tend to like to write lots of things that have happened, and then if I have debunked them, how I've debunked them, because then to me, that if that one thing out of 10 I can't debunk, and I'm being honest and saying I can't debunk it, I've done all these. To me, it makes it look a bit more valid that I've tried everything to not assume it's unexplainable, but it gives it that opportunity, and I do think that, I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? Everyone seems to want to have that amazing paranormal experience, but what they don't realise is there's very few people that are having them every 5 minutes. Most people might have one amazing one in 5 years of investigating. It's not something that's going to happen every single day for most people. So
it can make you kind of unpopular, right? Like we're our team is the Taps family representative for up here. We had just did the Cornwall jail shortly after Ghost Hunters went in and did it, and we debunked the evidence that they came up with.
Yeah.
4 months later, I was down at the reunion where I, obviously was spending some time with Jason and Grant, and they had a bit of a quick word with me onto the side about that one. But you know what? It's all about integrity too, right? I mean, I'm not going to agree with something because somebody else that I happen to like does. Yeah. And, I'm sure that Wes will find something on an investigation I might be able to debunk, and vice versa.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay, because all we're in this for is research. And, otherwise, why not just create an investigation and just fabricate all the evidence, in which case you'll become Zach Baggins.
Well, we'll zoom over that one, because I don't particularly want to get sued. All I know is if I ever get to go to Manswell, I'm going into that cell and I'm playing the music from Days of Our Lives, the theme tune, to see if that elicits anything, because to me that sounds like that would be a good little trigger experiment. Not that I have a clue what happens in Days of Our Lives. I know it's a soap opera over the wall, across the pond. That's about it. But I'm sure I could find the music to play and learn a few things to give Red a bit of an update as to what's been happening. Well, crumbs, that's an hour, guys, we've been chatting. Wow. God, blimey. Richard, how are you, me old cocker?
I'm doing great. I'm just recovering from the weekend, from the adventure Wes and I and our colleague Sarah had over in Bel Air, back in the real world.
I know, that's another one that's on my wish list. Getting to sort of having read some of the stuff you've put on social media, and sort of having spoken to Kristen, before, and done a show with her and stuff. It does definitely sound a fabulous place. But what did you want to come on air to say to us on this last ever Parasearch? It's the last actual Parasearch show, not just Haunted Histories, but the last ever Parasearch show.
I really just wanted to come on and thank everybody that listened to our ramblings and misadventures over the years, and to people like you, Penny, that did all of the work to make it happen. I mean, guys like us, we just, we're on Skype at the appointed time and we just sit down and talk, but you put a tremendous amount of work in. And so to everybody at Parasearch, like yourself and Kerry and the people behind the scenes, and everybody that kept listening, or there would have been no great adventure like this, I would just like to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you you were one of my first celeb guests, Richard.
I don't think I'm very much of a celeb, but
you were one of my first. And I don't know if anyone knows this, but when I first started, I had a list of people I wanted to get on, and I had one of Richard's books. I think it was the hospitals one, the haunted hospitals or something. And I'd read a load and thought, oh crumbs, he'd make a good guest. And so I actually looked you up and sent you a message. I said, would you mind being on I think I'd only been doing the show a few months at that point. And you were like, yeah, no problem. And it kind of, we created a monster, really. You got me writing, and you've been on my show numerous times. We've investigated together, and it's so I want to thank people like Richard and obviously Wes and Dave and all those people who've taken a chance on me when they didn't know who I was, and actually come on my show, added some amazing content to it. Because if it wasn't for you guys, people would have to listen to me talk for an hour, which hell, nobody wants to do. So, but I will be back. Haunted Histories is coming back in April on a new network, which I will be advertising, as I've said, on my Haunted Histories Facebook page, which if you haven't gone over and joined it, please do. It's not just going to be me talking about myself. It's going to be loads of history content, paranormal content, anyone who wants to share stuff that's got a history sort of bias to it. I'll be more than happy. Before that, though, I am out this Friday, as long as we don't get the snow they keep telling us we're going to get. I'll be at the Leopard Inn in Stoke, and then in a week on Saturday, again, as long as weather permits, I will be at Evesham talking all things haunted workhouses at the Supernatural Fair, which if you go online, you can find the details for that as well. And by the way, it's a free event. And Jane Harris from Help My House Is Haunted fame will be there with us. So my Lacey to my Cagney will be there. And then at the end of March, I'm a special guest at a charity event at the Village in Nottingham for Ryan Griffiths. So there's lots going on, but please do keep an eye on things. Anything else you want to add about Moundsville, Wes, before we sign off?
I mean, I encourage everybody, if they get the chance, I know, a lot of listeners are from England, but if they're visiting America, just to go to that area. I mean, as I say, and as you know, we did the Bel Air House this weekend, which is only about 10-minute drive from there.
Oh, is it? I didn't realize it was that close.
Yeah, 10 minutes. And so we went and we weren't able to do a tour of Moundsville. I wanted to get Richard in there, but they didn't do tours in the winter. So we just did an outside perimeter tour. But that entire area is just an unbelievable feeling. Like the oppression. It's in the Ohio Valley, and there's a lot of people out of work down there since the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. A lot of layoffs. Steel used to be a huge thing down there, the mining of steel. And those people are still there, and the descendants of those people are still there. And they're really struggling. And my heart goes out to them, because when you take that drive down the side of the river, you can see some of the houses, and they're in a total state of ruin. And just feel the depression in that whole area. And I think that really adds to the activity, I mean, drugs is a huge problem down there right now. And it's just really sad. It really is. But when I left there, I could feel like, a tremendous weight lifted off once I left that area. But it's a really unique experience. And I encourage anybody that, is really into the paranormal to go and visit that area. Cool.
Dave?
I completely concur with Wes. I want to get back down there. There's not a lot of places that live up to the hype, to be honest with you, in the States that, are considered haunted locations that, teams like us can go rent and do. That's the one thing our team has been very fortunate to go down. We make regular road trips to do as Wes does. And it's one of the few that actually, to me anyway, lived up to the hype. He's right about the area. It's if anything, a very, very interesting historical drive going through Glendale and all those areas down there where you can see all the old mine chutes going over the highway. But everything is it's obliterated. So I feel the same for the people down there. But you know what? It's great land to look at, and just a damn cool investigation, and a big enough place that get a couple teams together and rent half a hotel and just have a great time together, which is really what the paranormal community to me has been. It's been a huge family. So for that, I thank almost all the teams I've worked with. Man, great stuff. I really appreciate being on the show. I thank Wes for giving me the nudge to do this. Glad to have heard Richard on here. It's wonderful to continue the expansion of the community.
Definitely.
Looking forward to hearing where you land.
Well, and on that note, before I start crying, because even though Haunted Histories will be back, it's still a bit end of an era. I have experienced so much. It's been Parasearch has been an amazing ride. Richard Clements, you've said thanks for all my hard work. Good luck for the future. Good luck with you, mate. It was all your fault, remember. If it wasn't for you discovering me over 3 years ago whilst we were doing a Facebook Live from Rougham Airfield, this beast would never have been unleashed. So, like I say, it's all your fault. But thank you ever so much to all the people I've met. I can't list all the guests and all the amazing people I've met since I've been at Parasearch. There's just too many of you, but just keep in mind, I'm thankful to everyone. But on that note, the shows will be available on Spreaker for the next month. After that, they're going to be switching over to YouTube, so you can still listen to them. But keep an eye on what the rest of the team are doing. We'll all try and update you if there's someone you want to know what they're doing now. But on that note, I'm going to sign off. It's been an amazing 3 years. Thank you so much for all your support. Have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.